and startup ecosystem. So we do this through a variety of programs, events, boot camps, mentoring sessions, and just a host of other things. We encourage you after the event to visit our website at siliconvalleyforum.com to learn a little bit more, more about what we do. And we will also drop our contact information into the chat box. So we are excited about today's program. It is the future of drone delivery, which will be moderated by David Lee, who is an investor at Avanta Ventures. And Avanta Ventures is the investing arm of CSAA Insurance. And of course, we would love to thank Avanta Ventures for their amazing partnership and collaborating with us on the event today. So for everyone in the audience, we would like to remind you that this event is being recorded and you will be on mute through the duration of the program. But if you have any questions for our speakers or the moderator, please go ahead and put those questions into the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. And David will be sure to get to as many of those as he can. We're going to kick off the event by, before I go into that, I want to also mention that this, we are recording the event, and a link to this event, the recording will be sent out to everybody that has registered to the event, and it will also be uploaded on our Silicon Valley Forum YouTube channel. So we encourage you to share that with your friends and colleagues as well. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to our first guest, which is the Chief Executive Officer of CSAA Insurance, Tom Troy. Tom?
Denyse, thank you so much. And we're so excited to co-host this event with Silicon Valley Forum. Thanks again for setting this up, for our great panelists that we're going to have today. And thanks to all of you who have decided to dial in. We're encouraged by the fact that we've maxed out this particular Zoom channel here with over 300 participants. So I think this recording feature is going to be even more important this time as we look to share this information more broadly. And we certainly encourage you after the event to share the link with other people who are like-minded and interested in this space. Well, as Denyse mentioned, I'm Tom, CEO of CSAA Insurance Group. We've been insuring automobiles for over 100 years. And more recently, we've been focusing on the broader topic of mobility. And we've set our sights on being the top commercial drone insurance company of the future. And so we're very active in our own research and development in this space. And I'm guessing that there are more than a few of you out there on this call that know that insurance has to be, whether you will like it or not, part of your conversation going forward. And you might not have been sure about who you would want to talk to. Perhaps there's an opportunity for us to work together in the future, and we would look forward to that. Now, I'm so excited about all the work that many of you on the line and our panelists have been doing in this space. And I feel that we're really on the precipice of something really, really interesting, really powerful in terms of the way that this type of delivery mechanism can change the future. And so it's with a lot of optimism and excitement that I came to the session today. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the panelists. And again, hoping that we get a chance to meet face-to-face sometime in the future. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to David Lee with Avanta Ventures. Avanta is a CSAA Insurance Group company, and it's our investment arm. And David, looking forward to you kicking us off today.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. It's great to be with everyone here today. Super excited to co-host this event with Denyse and her team at SVF. As a brief background for our audience here today, I'm part of the investment team here at Avanta Ventures. As Tom mentioned, we are the venture arm of CSAA. We're early stage investors with strong focus on Series A investments across mobility and insurtech. I've been a car guy for a long time, so spend quite a bit of my time nerding out about all things mobility here for Avanta. And ultimately, mobility for us is about leveraging new technologies and business models to reinvent the way that we move goods and people. And we see drone technologies as a significant part of that, because by adding this third axis for how we think about movement, you can actually dramatically increase not just capacity, but also the efficiency of a lot of those operations and achieve and solve for many of the challenges we face today around ground transit. And more than anything, we think this is the time to build. In many ways, we're in the early innings here, where much of the infrastructure, the connectivity, and the technology is still being developed. And that just creates an immense opportunity that we see in this space. So super excited to be having this conversation around this topic today. We've brought in an amazing slate of panelists who are, the preeminent thought leaders at the forefront in this space. And because I won't do their backgrounds nearly enough justice, I'm going to have each of them share a little bit more with you about themselves. So Katie, you're the first little window on my Zoom screen, so maybe I'll have you kind of kick us off here today.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me. And I'm so pleased that we have so many participants. This is a great topic. I've been looking forward to this all week. So I'm really happy I could join you. My name is Katie Milner. I am an attorney and partner at the DC law firm Wiley. We do all things telecom in particular. We have a very strong telecommunications group that also encompasses emerging technologies. So my background in telecom and my interest in spectrum and electronics led me 6-7 years ago now to start thinking really hard about drones as the next big world-changing technology, and to think about helping my clients understand the regulatory environment and develop strategies to move that forward, because we are, I'm sure as we'll discuss today, in fairly uncharted waters, airspace, however you want to put it. So it's more important than ever to really be thoughtful about how you're engaging with the regulators on these issues. So I'm really happy to share my thoughts today.
Yarv, maybe we'll go to you next.
Sure. So I'm Yariv Bash, the co-founder and CEO of Flightrex. Before Flightrex, I was the CEO of Space IL, as in Space Israel. We raised $100 million and basically built the first private non-governmental spacecraft that reached the moon back in 2019. Before that, I was almost a decade doing R&D for the Israeli government.
Michael?
Yes, I'm Michael Healander, CEO of Airspace Link, and I've actually spent the past 2 decades building geospatial businesses and solutions for the federal government, Department of Transportation, state and local governments, and the private sector. And a lot of these solutions are things that you see every day. If you're driving down the road, any traffic signs are being managed by our system in 16 states here in the US and around the world, so in the transportation department. Then even if you have your mobile app, your favorite Delta or United app, if you use it for wayfinding indoors at some of the major airports, is some of the solutions and routing that we've built. And over the past couple of years, our team has moved over to taking that knowledge and starting to apply that to building drone highways, I guess is the best way to think about it. And we've done that by providing a near real-time digital infrastructure in partnership with the FAA here in the US, state and local governments, and a few strategic partners. And we've become, a key UTM technology provider in the US to scale simple drone operations for drone software, hardware, and service providers. So that's a little bit about us.
Great. And last but certainly not least, Bala.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I am the Vice President of Engineering for UPS, who happen to run the UPS Flight Forwards subsidiary, which works in drone delivery program, and been a variety of roles here at UPS, and happen to be an aerospace engineer by training. So glad to be here. Looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Well, great. Thank you. And as a quick note for our audience today, please don't be shy about asking questions to our panel. You can type it in the Zoom chat box. We want to keep this a pretty interactive discussion. So, I'll be monitoring that throughout our time today, and we'll incorporate a number of your questions into the discussion as well. Okay, so I always like to start these things by setting a baseline for the audience. You know, we've obviously seen announcements, right, around a number of kind of drone-enabled deliveries beginning to take flight, pun intended. But what we've yet to see are really large-scale kind of production deployments. So first question for the panel today, maybe just help give us a baseline understanding of where we are toward enabling the vision of drone delivery, whether that's technology, regulatory, infrastructure, or otherwise.
I'm
Maybe I-
happy to lead off a little bit with the legal framework, if that works. You may recall back in 2013 when an enterprising billionaire named Jeff Bezos went on 60 Minutes and said that Amazon was working on delivery by drone. We have come a long way since then in terms of regulatory authority, but there are still some obstacles that we face, and I hope to hear from my fellow panelists about those. But just for the legal framework we're operating under right now, the FAA in 2016 released its Part 107 rules for commercial small UAS operations. These did a lot to routinize commercial UAS to give those companies a chance to start to put their business plans to use. But there were restrictions that made it really hard to use Part 107 for drones, particularly the limitation on flying beyond visual line of sight, which would not be a very far delivery, unfortunately, and the restrictions on flying over people. So since Part 107, some carriers have been able to utilize that framework and get various exemptions and authorizations to do drone delivery and have been successful with that. My conversations with the FAA have indicated that they view the path forward on drone delivery to be authorization under what's known as Part 135, which is the authorization as an air carrier. This is a holdover, or not a holdover, but arises from aviation use, traditional regular airplanes, and the FAA is now trying to kind of custom fit that for drone use. It's a pretty involved process. You need to show that you have economic authority, that you're using a type certified aircraft, and that you're complying with a real litany of FAA rules. But so far, this has been a success for certain operators to gain Part 135 authority. I'm interested in hearing what UPS's experience was with that. So those are kind of the two ways forward on drone delivery and the current state of the FAA.
And I guess I'll jump in. You know, in our perspective, we feel like regulations are starting to catch up. There's a lot of things that happened over the past year. Technology is getting approved through those type certifications that you just talked about. Federal, state, and local governments are starting to invest in, we'll call it UAS infrastructure. You're starting to see that in North Dakota, and a few other states are starting to budget for it. And what's really interesting is the new 2021 U.S. Department of Transportation budget has actually set aside $1.4 billion to help integrate drones into the U.S. And that's ranging from LANCE, remote ID, streamlining the regulatory process. So there's some really exciting things that happen in 2020, but there's also a lot coming down the pipe for 2021 to help those types of operations. But today we are seeing things happen. Like you said, there are pockets. We're seeing our system supporting public safety drone operations in Ontario, California, Flagler County, Florida. There's this new system being used in COVID test kit deliveries in Syracuse, New York, which was the first high density delivery over cars and traffic and people. We were able to get a waiver there. And so there's these pockets starting to happen. North Dakota is its own story. They have highway inspections starting to kick off. Supply chain parts delivery in Michigan is starting to kick off along a automotive supply chain. So there are these little pockets that are happening within the industry, and we're really excited about it and helping support that. And ultimately, from our perspective as a company, our core purpose is really to safely pave the way to help integrate Flytrex and UPS into these communities as frictionless as possible.
It's I'll jump in and say a few words. Well, drone deliveries have been a pie in the sky for so many years, and every once in a while you get a headline about a test here or a small pilot there. And as Katie and Michael said, it's mostly based around Part 107, which are very limited operations. the real path forward is type certification part 135. Flightrex is one of a few companies that the FAA just announced that will be getting hopefully, will be getting the worthiness soon. And I think that the path that the FAA has chosen is amazing. Instead of just giving out more waivers and exemptions, the FAA picked up the glove and said, okay, this is going to be huge. We need to solve that on a national level. Now let's start working on that seriously. It's taking a few years now, 3 years, and we're still running, but that's what it takes. We've been doing beyond visual line of sight deliveries above Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, back in 2017. So building a drone with an app, that's easy. We've done that 4 years ago. Certifying an airplane for federal usage all over the US, that's a very different mission. And it should be. We want to keep the skies as safe as they are today. And it's not a commercial drone. This is a small airplane. So there's huge progress. In 2021, we're going to see the first companies getting the airworthiness or type certification together with part 135 for the operator. So you have type certification for the vehicle, for Boeing or Flightrex. And then you have part 135 for the operator, like United or UPS. And with those two, you'll start seeing more deployments, broader drone usages, drone delivery usages. And I guess we'll see the first large deployments later this year. And we're going to see this booming in 2022. I think it's going to be, it's going to boom a lot faster than electric coconuts, electric scooters and those things. Because once you go for drone deliveries, it's just greener, better, safer, faster, cheaper. It's just better.
Oh, anything to add?
Yeah, so we can talk about it from an operator perspective. So we've been doing this for about 4 to 5 years, starting off with smaller tests when framework didn't exist. And of course, once the framework existed, we're one of the key people. We worked with the FAA to form, and of course, we are members of UPS as a member of the Drone Advisory Committee, and joined the Integration Pilot Program. It was started in 2017. Started testing our healthcare campus model, which we thought was the most appropriate model for the risk-benefit calculation and for urgent healthcare movements. And then, of course, we're the first airline to get fully certified with the Part 135. Since then, we've expanded into what's called Partnership for Safety programs, and also now with IPP becoming the Beyond program, we're part of both of those. And the other piece we just completed is now we became the first Part 135 operator to operate in 2 states. We are now operating both in North Carolina and Florida. And of course, based on our scale, we want to be global over time. Still a ways to go. I would say that we've been operating our larger 121 airline for about 30 years now, more than 30 years. So we come from a background of safe operations, and so we know how to do this stuff at scale. And so we're looking forward to working with the FAA to take this forward into a safe operating environment. And I have a slightly different perspective compared to some of the comments I heard, which is I look upon this as one other mode for delivering things. We deliver things, move things by airplanes, we move things by trucks, we move things by e-bikes, we move things by mopeds in certain areas, and drones will be one other mode that'll get it done. Certain parts it's cheaper, better, certain parts it's not. So I would look upon this as one additional mode for the delivery paradigm that includes a layer of technologies that we bring to the table. Thanks.
Got it. Certainly a lot to unpack there. I want to start on the regulatory side first, and this is the first question from our audience, but how does Part 135 certification interact with 107 as it relates to operating in navigable airspace versus below 400 feet?
Maybe I'll kick it out there, and then someone else pick up the ball there. we tend to really separate those. I feel like Part 107 is flying drones under certain rules. Part 135 is you're getting it, aircraft worthiness, and there's a complete process to manage the drone, and it's a whole new level. It's kind of I don't know what the best analogy is, but this is commercialized, and in some cases you could probably need an actual pilot to fly these drones. So it's about a process. So they'll be probably separated, and you start to think about remote ID and things like that. Remote ID is actually more for Part 107 to do certain advanced operations, but even Part 135 and flying beyond visual line of sight might even have its own network system and complete different set of rules. And I'll kick it off to that because we don't do the 135 cert process. We just take the airworthiness from that process and make sure it's compliant. Maybe that's over to Flytrex or UPS.
Maybe more suitable for the lawyer first before this.
Yeah, I think what Michael said is right there. These are different paths to consider, so they aren't really working together. Part 135 is going to enable you to do a lot of things that you can't do under Part 107, such as fly over people. Part 107 has the 400-foot altitude restriction unless you are able to get a waiver. You're only in Class G airspace under Part 107, unless you can get an authorization, typically through the land system. So generally speaking, I think for a scalable business case, you're probably looking more to Part 135, and that'll enable you to do more things that you could do under 107.
That's right.
The way that we look at that, and I'll add a few words, is the last regulations that are out under Part 107, the drone ID and some observable people categories. They basically pave the way to two segments. You've got the 107 for simple operations, real estate agents that would like to take a few images of a house, etc., and would need to fly a bit above people. But if you're looking to do long range, beyond visual line of sight, larger drones, you're going to need 135 for sure. And basically, those new ops are under 107 is the way of the FAA telling you that they're not going to continue giving you waivers and exemptions for complex operations under 107. Simultaneously, drone ID, while it doesn't relate to Part 135, actually really helps us. Now everybody who buys a DJI drone in the store is going to have a license plate on his drone. So you'll be a lot more liable to anything you'll do in the air. So if people have been doing crazy stuff with their private drones until now, which might be a bit of a problem for regulated drone delivery companies. Right now, everybody has a drone, will have a license plate on his drone. So people will be less inclined into doing silly stuff in the air as private people.
Yeah, so without getting into too much of the legalese, which I'm sure Katie can handle, there's basically three dimensions that you think about, right? So one is the classes of airspace you can get into or not. Second is the distance that you can fly and line of sight, et cetera, which you see, whether you need a visual observer or not. And third dimension, I would say, is the weight limit, right? So those are the three big dimensions that you get more leeway for Part 135. And if you want to build a sustainable, scalable, economically viable model, then you need all those three dimensions to make it work.
Yeah. And over the past couple of years, I mean, like you mentioned, Katie, right? It really does feel like the FAA has begun to push out a number of these new policies and updates, remote ID being the recent one. But, between what we've talked about with 107, 135, exceptions, LANCs, what I'm curious about is, where do you all see the gaps from a regulatory perspective to actually enable us to commercialize and scale this technology?
Arthur, I'll kick it out there again, get us started. But for us and what we are focusing on is, you're getting certification, you have the drones approved and the ability to start to deliver packages for money. One of the biggest problem and what we've been getting budgets for is supporting the infrastructure for that. So today, a lot of the onus is on the operator. So for example, if you're going to start to fly and you're going to fly at low altitudes, well, you still have communication networks you have to make sure that are involved. You still need to have certain type of radar. And some of it's old school surveillance systems and collision avoidance systems and so on. So for us, the biggest gap that we're trying to solve is to create a shared infrastructure that multiple drone operators can use for Type 135 and advanced operations through, through certain areas or, cover entire state. And we're seeing that happen. There's actually full budgets to put beyond visual line of sight infrastructure across entire states, which will then help the industry take off. So connecting to that shared networks versus UPS putting in one and Flytrex putting in one and so on. You have all these overlaps. So that's what I'm seeing and what we're racing to get solved as quickly as possible.
If I could mention a couple gaps that I'm seeing as well. I was interested in what Michael was saying about the usefulness of remote ID for your small UAS, but the need for a network system on a larger scale to support real expanded operations. And that was interesting in the remote ID proceeding. If I can give a little bit of background, that originally the FAA had proposed to use both a networked solution and a broadcast-based solution, and industry was largely on board with that, with either approach. And then the rules the FAA ultimately adopted only contemplate a broadcasted solution. So when we're thinking about really ubiquitous drones doing lots of different things in all types of different environments, we're talking about the need for a UTM system. And without that kind of framework for how they're going to be networked together, I think that needs to be figured out before we can get to that phase that a lot of businesses are picturing where they're going to be able to fly freely. And I definitely want to hear what the other panelists have to say on that need. And if I could just throw in too, the need for FCC engagement. I am a telecom lawyer and a spectrum lawyer as well. And drones today rely largely on unlicensed spectrum, the same thing that powers our Wi-Fi and our garage door openers. And as these flights get more complicated, more complex, go further, carry people, there's going to be a real need for dedicated spectrum. And it's going to be the need to engage with the FCC on getting those allocations and service and licensing rules.
Yep, absolutely. And maybe we can pick up on that point, Katie, in terms of, the other question that I had was, as you look beyond the FAA, right, at other stakeholders within this ecosystem, it sounds like the FCC is one of them, but maybe help us understand, who are the other stakeholders that really need to get involved here if we want to scale service, FCC, and how does that evolve, right, as the space matures?
All right. Well, why don't I take this one? So, since we've been working in the space for a couple of years. So, look, the thing is, there's a variety of stakeholders that you need to work with to kind of make this happen, right? So, I would say, of course, the FAA is the number one kind of agency that you work with pretty closely. DOT plays a big role. The state DOTs have been, at least in the initial phases, because they've been trying to help shape it. And finally, of course, we have to engage with the local communities because the acceptance is going to be key in taking this forward. So it's a variety of stakeholders that you need to bring to the table, of course, but the key stakeholder is the FAA, who finally has the authority in this area. Now, I'm not going to talk about the spectrum piece, which is another topic which Katie probably can talk about more.
And to Bala's point, even within the FAA, there's regional FAA, and there's different levels even in the FAA. And then we start to talk about state and local governments. Then you get into the regional transportation groups and mobility. But then, if you do engage with these different groups the right way, they can actually help fund. And there are some dollars coming down through the federal highways that are going to help support unlocking a lot of this. So it's very important that we're working at all levels as much as we can to get it across the line at a regional scale. and the spectrum too. I follow it. I just am not involved in it enough for what we're doing.
Got it. Well, I feel like we could talk about regulations all day, but another topic that I want to talk about is the technology side of things. So, in order to scale this application of drone delivery specifically, how do you all think about the technical requirements to do so, whether it's batteries, maintaining a certain level of reliability, software side of things, et cetera?
So I can talk about our approach at Flightlex. So we're aiming at doing on-demand deliveries, basically getting you your pizza or burrito or your next iPhone to your backyard. And for that, we need to be able to charge only a few bucks per delivery. Otherwise, it's not going to be affordable for anyone. You'll just continue using the current services. And for that, we need really affordable drones. And we need to use the same guys that bring you your food today and have them operate the system. And that requires a very unique approach. And basically what we've done is basically design a complete autonomous system with very simple drones. They're certifiable, we're certifying them. But for instance, I don't have any cameras on board. The operator doesn't have a joystick or a virtual cockpit. And my mission computer is actually an Android cell phone. And so that supplies me the connectivity over cellular as well. So that way I avoid the FCC problem as well. Currently that's allowed, let's put it that way. And that way you can create a very affordable system, and you mitigate the simplicity of the drone and the operator by having a very smart cloud-based system that can mitigate any problem that arises for the operator or the drone itself. At Flightlex, we've got a bigger team working on the cloud than we've got a team working on the drone itself. And that way, at least for us, we can manage to perform deliveries that are equivalent in pricing to a guy in a 2012 Toyota bringing you your cheeseburger for dinner.
So, I can add to it. Yair talked about and I'm smiling because, look, the thing is putting, as he said, right, putting 4 rotors on a aircraft is something he can do in grad school. I probably could have done in grad school. It's not a big
project.
deal. Yes, exactly. The magic is in taking that and making it certifiable, right? Which is basically that can meet certain specs and at a cost that's scalable that can meet my economic model. That's the fine thread that you have to thread through that eye of the needle, right? And you can't, unlike home, whatever your off-the-shelf drone system that you buy, be updating this stuff every 2 weeks with software updates, right? You can't have, without understanding causal algorithms written into it, right, which is explainable algorithms, you need to have a really high bar because you need to explain how the results are coming out of a certain algorithm. So there's a variety of issues in getting it to a level that's airworthy, certifiable worthy, or certification worthy. And most of the work we've seen, I wouldn't say most, a lot of the work we've seen, as Yair mentioned, is people can put things together. The question is, how do you take it to the next level at a cost that's effective to create an economic model at scale? So I hope that kind of explains the hump that the entire industry has to get over.
Yeah, and that airworthiness and then compliance. How do you stay compliant? I think that's what you're hitting on there. And you could start to go about, what about charging stations and emergency landing locations and typical infrastructure? I always fall back on that because, I know there's a lot of smart people building awesome drones and they will scale and they'll get affordable. It's about how do we get it to the point, because the FAA does say, what happens if there's an emergency and how do you do that? So again, looking at existing infrastructure that's out there today, cell towers are great locations. They're secured and they have power. And there's a model for them to be part of the network of charging locations, and they could build a business model around that. So looking at things like that as we start to scale these operations to support battery life and things like that.
And I'd add these technological developments are so interesting to me. And the FAA maybe has not moved as quickly as innovative companies would like to approve some of them, like automation. I saw recently, actually just in January, the FAA approved its first automated drone operations. But that's just the FAA's background. And I think that's a real struggle for, since we have a Silicon Valley audience here, to wrap your heads around that there are so many things standing in your way. The FAA's mandate is to promote safety, and they're not going to permit something until there's good data on it, till it's been tested, till perhaps it's been proven in these pilot programs like the IPP or beyond. Those are the ways you can get the regulators really comfortable with all these really cool things you're trying to do.
Yeah, I can give an example. So there's the ASTM parachute testing, for instance, and that requires you to test your drone's parachute system in 45 different scenarios while you're being viewed by a third-party agency that's approved by the FAA to come and watch your testings for. It usually takes between a week and 2 weeks. So during those tests, we destroyed so many drones and deployed so many parachutes, and that's just just to make sure in case everything else fails and all the different mitigations and redundancies we have on board fail, just to make sure that there's also another independent system that can fire the parachute and sound the siren and shut down the motors. So it's, as Katie said, it's all about safety. And to tell you the truth, I'm happy that it's that way because those drones are going to fly above our heads as well. So it's good that the FAA is taking their time. This is new for everyone, and it's a step-by-step process, and that's okay. That's it's not a sprint; it's a marathon.
Yeah. Another question from the audience. I want to paraphrase a little bit, but if you look into all of your crystal balls, right? Do you see drone delivery mainly being applicable, at least initially, for the last mile and the middle mile, or is it long distance? How do you think about the different use cases here?
So I'll touch upon that. Bala mentioned before that drones are going to be one of the methods of transportation. Currently, the FAA is limiting drones under Part 135 under the new regulations to up to 25 kilograms or 55 pounds or so. So as you could imagine, those kinds of vehicles will be mostly used for the last mile or short range on demand deliveries. As time progresses, we're already seeing companies and startups working on larger vehicles for longer ranges. But at least at the beginning, you're going to see most of the companies that are, almost all the companies that are going through the airworthiness process are using smaller drones for, you could say, short ranges from a few miles up to maybe a few dozens of miles in case of zipline, for instance. So that's the current situation, but it will change.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing a variety of drones being used for a variety of use cases, whether it's long range COVID vaccine deliveries or short range on-campus flights or back and forth between hospitals. I almost see if you're going to deliver a drone delivery service to a customer or residents or businesses, is you're going to have a fleet of different types of drones based on the operation. So lighter drones, simpler flights, and then more complex. And they're going to be coming relatively soon, but they're going to be different forms and functions based on the use case that they're certified in. Some are just certified in medical delivery in some cases, and then then they have to get cert. So there's almost verticals we're seeing. It's not formal, but we're seeing that happen. If you're going to do organ delivery, that's very different than doing a automotive part or rivet deployed across a manufacturing plant. So different use cases, different types of drones, different types of companies, where UPS might not want anything to do with those smaller operations, but Flytrex might be that's perfect fit, and that business can grow around that.
Got it. One more from the audience. Line of sight, of course, limits distance, but even beyond that, doesn't battery weight and power limit drone delivery to last mile deliveries? Solid state batteries may extend that slightly, but what is the general case in terms of distance and business models?
So basically, the bigger the drone, the further the distance. The batteries, chemistries, the motors, there aren't giant leaps. It scales on a linear basis, or the technology progresses very linearly. But if you have a small drone, then you can fly for a few miles, maybe a bit more than that. Once the drone grows up a bit or becomes a bit bigger, you can go for a fixed wing solution, and then you can fly to dozens of miles. And if you're talking about bigger vehicles, a few hundreds of kilograms, you can even talk about hundreds or even more than 1,000 miles away. So it really depends on the size of the vehicle. And again, the way I see that, we're going to start with small drones being approved and certified. And as time progresses and everybody feels safe with that, we'll see bigger drones and further distances being approved by the FAA.
Yeah, I agree with you. First of all, I don't know why people are saying that drones have to be electric, right? So that's I don't know where that came from. So that's number one. Number two, so that's the first thing I'll say. The second is conceptually, yes, we just have to figure out the regulatory frameworks of how potentially that could happen. And third piece is economic models is going to be the key, right? The question is going to be, is it more cost effective to do it a certain way versus the other? What is the customer willingness to pay? There's a lot of other factors before it can become economically viable. Just because it can doesn't mean you should do it.
Yeah. I want to turn to the ecosystem side of this, because a number of you have started to bring this up already. But in many ways, the regulations and technology are being built out. But the surrounding ecosystem, a lot of ways enables that commercialization as well. So what are you seeing today as it relates to the infrastructure side, whether it's the takeoff and landing or emergency landing, like you mentioned, Michael, or air traffic management, recharging, all of these different components?
I'll just throw out there, I think one of the main things is trying to get FAA to approve the shared infrastructure. It's a bit large for them to take on the entire country and put in that low altitude infrastructure. So there are solutions that can be put in. And here's where I think there was a question earlier about, FAA moves at a certain pace and they have a certain way of doing it, and bringing innovation doesn't always work with the FAA, and you have to be patient. What I think is we're finding is that if you can use the existing infrastructure that they're used to today, their existing communications networks, their existing surveillance, and then couple that with onboard collision avoidance systems, even though they want you to use their traditional collision avoidance systems, that will make them comfortable to the point where they can start to pull that away. And that's what we're starting to see is, it's a little bit extra investment in the infrastructure to overlap. But that is what's unlocking in these areas to do it at least at scale at county or regional parts of the US is trying to do that. So to me, it's getting that shared infrastructure to help open this up for all types of drone operations.
On the legal side, with the potential of takeoff and landing spots, that falls under your locality's traditional zoning power most often, rather than an FAA issue. So I would say businesses need to be very aware of, I won't go so far as to say, fear mongering, but there are some negative pieces of legislation working their way through state legislatures that would be very difficult for a business to overcome. And you don't want to be so focused on getting everything on your side in place only to have nowhere to fly. So that's an important component. And in terms of network infrastructure, I think the use of the commercial mobile spectrum infrastructure that's already in place to support our cell phones is very interesting as a potential conduit to enable network drones, because that's already built out, and perhaps with some tweaks to the equipment and the antennas and whatnot, it could support drone flights. So I think the FAA should be interested in helping further those studies and use cases. And I know both in terms of using the LTE networks and the potential of 5G networks for drones. There's been a lot of good thought so far on that.
And Katie, to piggyback on the jurisdictions of landing locations, that's something we've been working ahead on. Is we actually have tools to show the impact if you start to restrict. So there's an economic impact to having drone delivery services or drone services in advanced operations. So we show that impact, the upside of having that type of infrastructure and supporting drone operations in your cities. But also we show the negative impact if you start to put in too many ordinances that would affect the same thing. And again, we try those issues don't become a major issue. That's a big one for us.
Yeah. We're getting a lot of questions on another topic, which is around sales that should be addressed now, etc. A lot of what ifs are all over the place. So maybe talk about security and risk here.
We stop at a point where the operator takes off, and then we authorize that flight and they data and stuff like that. But then I think manufacturers of these advanced drones, so in place. But you know, here's the thing, you can hijack all kinds of things, but the FAA does add another level of scrutiny.
It's the same for of hacking or trying to hack the system. Basically, at the end, the most someone can do is tell a drone to fly somewhere else, and it will. In the world, really, it's okay. So you can you can the same way you can just go on and do whatever you want with it. You'll be able to do a lot more with a drone from the store than you can do with mine. So it's we have a few layers of mitigations. It's at the end that will be their own, and we'll use it for whatever bad thing they like to do. We're allowed by doing to mark and point on a map. Everything is pre-surveyed and pre-known, so it's a very safe system to use. And again, in case there is a hacking situation, there are a few levels of from trying to do it. There is factor from.
Yeah. And kind of on the parallel security, right? I'm curious how you all think of kind of the risk management and insurance side of things of drone deliveries. Are most operators like Flytrex or UPS self-insuring at this time? How do you see some of this evolving and developing as this industry matures?
So I'm not sure about UPS. I can tell you that our third-party liability insurance for vehicles, while we're doing ops over people in Reykjavik, in Iceland, is roughly 1/10 of what an Uber driver pays for his car. So it's already considered a lot safer by insurance companies. And the more statistics we'll have, the more certification we'll get, the more flights we'll have, the better the numbers will be.
So, we have a risk management teams that we already have an airline that we operate, right? So this is not new to us. The safety is a core value. These values don't change. We have existing safety assessment processes. We have that we use in our big airline, which we are replicating in the smaller one. It's just a way of living for us, so we know how to handle that.
Yeah, and maybe I'll jump in too, because maybe we look at recreational pilots all the way up to commercial. And then, I think this is really interesting because a lot of things that all of us are doing on this call it is about safety and focusing on how to, understand the hazards and the risks. So there are calculations that we have to do is when you put in the airworthiness and the operator and what you're flying over, we have to calculate it. And, the goal right now is 10 to the -7 power probability of hitting something or doing something. So it's interesting where insurance could be a fit, as we take the safety data from ASTM and NASA and FAA and MITRE and the JARS models, and we build out your flight plans and stuff like that. We can start to take into account hazards, risks, threats, likelihood, severity, and mitigation plans, and then learn from that. And you could start to have some interesting on-demand insurance based on all those factors, because we have to do those today, and we're doing that for the FAA. And maybe it's not for a UPS, but it might be for that middle operator that's operating a smaller. I mean, there's all kinds of logistics companies, and probably UPS uses these small regional logistics companies to help get things out. They might have a drone service in the future that would need cheaper insurance that's maybe on demand. Again, that's our perspective. We're doing so much work that's really close to insuring that maybe there's the ability to insurance is involved in that process at the end.
I'll add on what Michael just said. Basically, if you think about the alternative, then what you have today, at least for on demand, you've got a guy in a 1-ton car driving up to 55 miles per hour to bring you your 1-pound dinner. And that guy might be driving for 10 hours a day. I don't know how many hours of sleep he had. Maybe he's texting someone while driving. And when you compare that to an autonomous vehicle with multiple levels of redundancy that was certified by the FAA, then no matter what you do, you're going to be a lot better than what's currently happening on the roads. So we're already starting at an amazing point, and these machines are only going to get better and safer with time.
Let's make sure we don't run into a Lamborghini or something. So.
Okay, well, I think we've only got about a minute or two left, but I'd love to end by having each of you leave a few words of advice, because one of the core kind of groups within the audience today are startup founders, right, in the space. So as a final question, based on each of your own experiences, kind of what types of advice or words of wisdom would you give to founders looking to build a business in the drone or drone delivery space?
Maybe I'll start since I'm probably closest. And I would say, be innovative, but be willing to, and I think I already said it, build alongside older technology and run alongside of that. Don't necessarily come in with a new technology and force it. It doesn't go well. It's better to run alongside old technology, understand the old technology that maybe you're trying to replace, run alongside of that, figure out a way to do that, and then so that you can then branch off. I don't know, that's a little specific, but that's something that we've seen.
I'd say that be ready for a marathon. We're talking about working with the FAA. I think there are less aviation companies, airplane manufacturers, than there are drug manufacturers. So be ready for a long marathon with the FAA. And don't be tempted to go for the quick PR for marketing stunts. They weigh off really fast. It's a marathon. Keep on running. You'll get there at the end. And make sure that you don't burn all your cash before you get to the end of the runway.
I'd echo the FAA point. My advice would be to definitely keep an eye on the FAA, keep an eye on Congress. They are willing to work with industry, and there are great venues for doing that. The Joint Advisory Committee, there are rulemaking committees from time to time on specific issues. And there have been times where my clients have wanted to do something that I thought they wouldn't be able to do. And we've had a meeting with the FAA and been able to hash through some of these issues and come up with a plan to be able to do that. So be aware of your regulations. You don't want to move beyond what the FAA is permitting. And this isn't something your IP lawyer can handle. You know, you need to have some DC foresight and strategy here.
Agree. Yep.
I can add from an operator side. So we're always looking for technology partners. So if you have an interesting idea, feel free to reach out. And echo what Yair said. It's going to be a long haul. And also, please make sure that you keep the economic model in mind. And when you build a business, you have a long-term financial model that seems to make economic sense within the industry and how it's evolving.
Great advice. Well, with that, I think we're pretty much out of time here. So thank you to all four of you for joining us. Denyse, I'm going to hand it back to you to say a couple closing words.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much, David. And I just want to thank our panelists. That was a wonderful discussion, and quite honestly felt it could probably have gone on for another hour. Just looking at all the questions that we had coming in from our audience. And so we just want to thank everyone for joining us. Thanks to our audience. And we hope that everyone has a great rest of the day, and just want to say stay safe. And thanks so much.
Thank you. Great job,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.